there are 7 parshias that can be combined in the Chumash.
7 doubles.
7 doubles, exactly. There's the one of Vayakel Pekude. There is Tazria Mitzoira. We had that already. Achreimos Kedoshim, we had that as well. Bhar Bchukosie is this week.
Matos Mahase.
Exactly. Chukas Balak is one. Nice to see you, David. Looking good.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Sure.
He looks
Matas
like a
Masay.
rabbi.
Exactly. You can too, you know.
Yeah, but I don't like long hair on my face. I'm sorry. I
You get
tried
used
it.
to it. You get used to it. It
Now is
saves
the time to
time.
do
You know how
it.
much time you save? If you add up all the minutes you save by not shaving, it's like a few days in your life.
Few
Depends
years.
how much you spend
Yeah.
on your beard.
I don't spend time on my beard. I just let it be. So we also have Nitzavim Vayelach. That rounds out the 7 possible combined parshias. And it's interesting that when we combine parshias and we make them one, they actually become one parsha. We don't treat them like 2 separate parshias. We treat them like one parsha. Practically speaking, when we give out the aliyas, the way we divide the aliyas in a double parsha is that we combine the 2 parshias in one aliyah, so that the first parsha is read in 3 aliyahs, and then there are 3 aliyahs for the second parsha, and the middle aliyah, the 4th aliyah, is the one that bridges the 2 parshias. Actually, you know, in some shuls, they add extra aliyahs. It's called hoisafos, because you're supposed to have at least 7 aliyahs on Shabbos, at least 6 aliyahs on Yom Kippur, and at least 5 aliyahs on Yom Tov, but you're allowed to add to them. Now, in some shuls today, they don't add, they just stick to the minimum. But in many shuls, if they need to, if there's a simcha, if there's a bar mitzvah, if there's a few yard sites or whatnot, they add aliyahs, and that's called hoisafos. Hoisafa means an addition. So it's interesting that the halacha is that if you want to add aliyahs when you have a double parsha, you only add aliyahs to the second parsha, not to the first. Because if you would add to the first, it might seem like the second parsha is not so important. Like you're giving out the main aliyahs, right? The 7 main aliyahs, and anything beyond 7 is extra. And if you give more than 3 to the first parsha, it might seem like it's the more important of the 2. So therefore, you give 3 of the mandatory aliyahs, the minimum aliyahs to the first one, 1 to bridge the gap, 3 in the second one, and that rounds out all 7. And then if you want to add, you can add. But you don't add more than the basic 3 in the first one. And this is all to emphasize that we treat the 2 parshias as if they are one. Yes, question? Anybody have any question, comment?
I see that we're going to finish the book of Vayikra.
Exactly. We're going to say chazak.
Right.
That's correct. We are mandated to finish the book of Vayikra this week. We have no choice because the Gemara says that you're always supposed to read the Parsha of Bamidbar before Shavuos. And that's to interrupt between the curses that we have in this week's Parsha in Bchukosie. There's a whole list of curses if a person, God forbid, does not follow the Torah. So we don't want to go into the holiday of Shavuos with that in our mouths, with that memory strong in our heads. So instead, we always have the Parsha of Bamidbar first. But we still do want to have it close to Shavuos, because the truth is that it's a cleansing process. We have to cleanse ourselves before that holiday, so we have it always, and then Bamidbar, and then Shavuos. So that's the way it has to be at this time of year. It is noteworthy, the Lubavitcher Rebbe points out, that there are some who have a custom to actually break the aliyahs exactly in between the parshias. That is the Yemenite custom. The Yemenites will finish an aliyah at the end of whatever the first parsha is and start the next aliyah for the next parsha. However, the common custom, both for Sfardim and for Ashkenazim, is to have it in one aliyah. And this emphasizes that we treat it like one parsha, not like two parshas that are joined, but like one parsha. So, therefore, whenever two parshas are joined, one can examine how these two parshas are related. Because the fact that we connect them and make them one, it's not just they're a little bit small, and we have to, after all, finish the whole parsha in 1 year. But some years are longer than others because we have leap years every so often. So we have an extra month. And some years there's more Shabbosim than others, depending on how Yom Tov comes out in connection with Shabbos. So therefore, we have to have some, some parshias that are rearrangeable to be able to fit in all the parshias between one Simchas Torah and the other. So we're just going to grab some random small parshias and we'll put them together. No, that's not the way it works. The way it works is that if these parshias are put together and are read as one, it's because they obviously must have some theme that joins them together and makes them one. Of course, sometimes they're separate because they're not necessarily one, but they could be one. And we do see this by several of the joined parshias. Take, for example, we were talking about Vayakhel Pekudei. That's the first one in the Chumash that can be joined. Well, both of them are about the building of the Mishkan, the actual building of the Mishkan and the making of the vessels and the clothing of Aaron and putting the Mishkan together. So it really is one theme. Then you want to talk about the next one, Tazria and Mitzorah. That's both about the laws of what makes a person into a Mitzorah, a leper, and how he purifies himself. Acharemos Kedoshim, there we have a lot of shared ideas in the two parshias, where we have the end of Acharemos talking about forbidden relationships, and the end of Kedoshim talking about those same prohibitions. And if you want to look ahead into Matos Masei, that's too far ahead. I can't think that far ahead. So let's just focus on this week's parsha. This week's parsha is two joined, which become one, and we have to examine them and see how they are really one. So the Rebbe focuses on the names of the parshias, And the names which tell us what the parsha is really about. Let me just shut that off. Give me a second, please. Very noisy phone I have now. Oh, I can't even find it after all that. Okay, so let's focus on the names of the parshias, because the names really tell us what the parsha is about. And then we'll see how we can connect them to each other. So the name of the first parsha is Bhar. Hashem spoke to Moshe Bhar Sinai, on Mount Sinai. And then the parsha goes on to teach the laws of the Shemitah, which is the 7th year, the laws of the Yovel, which is the 50th year, and then the laws of buying and selling property and how one can redeem back the property that they sold, as well as redeeming a slave that was sold and so on. That's Parshas Bhar. And then Bhar Bchukosie, which means my statutes, my laws. If you follow my laws, then you'll get many blessings. And the Torah specifies the blessings. And then if God forbid one does not follow the laws, then there are curses that are enumerated, God forbid. Noisy phone, I don't know what's with it. Give me a second, please. Okay, thank you so much for your patience. The word Bhar Bchukosie, which means my laws, is specifically referring to the laws that are not understandable. We know there are 3 types of mitzvahs. There are 3 types of mitzvahs. You can mute everybody and you can unmute yourself as needed. So the one is the mishpatim, which are the laws that we can understand. Then are the eidos, which are the testimonials, the mitzvahs that give testimony to different things, like the Exodus and putting on tefillin to remind us of things, and the sukkah to remind us of things. And then finally we have the chukim, which are the statutes that we don't really understand, like the kosher laws, like shatnez, like the red heifer. So Bhar Bchukosie means especially the laws that we don't understand. And here's where we have a question. Because Bhar means on the mountain. And if we try to think of what a mountain symbolizes strength, power, might, grandeur. And that seems to be the opposite of what Bhar Bchukosie represents. Bhar Bchukosie represents doing the will of Hashem, even though we do not understand what the reason for that will is. Meaning to say, it's something that is representing complete humility. And Bhar represents something that is not quite so humble, but rather somebody or an attitude that is a little bit self-assured and knowing exactly what the person wants to accomplish, strong in their will, which is what a mountain symbolizes. So if these 2 parshias are truly one, how is it that their names are so different and seemingly opposite? One is about strength of character, and the one is about absolute humility. This is the Lubavitcher Rebbe's question. let's pause and allow for discussion. If anybody has any answers or just anything to bring up or talk about, by all means. Anybody?
Rabbi,
Yes.
you said before that Shabbos is a chok, but isn't Shabbos a edus? That it's connected
Shabbos
with the
is an edus. Yes,
Yeah.
Shabbos is an edus. It's a testimony to the fact that Hashem created the world. In fact, when we make Kiddush, we are considered like we are testifying that Hashem created the world. When we say Vayechulu in Shul, where it's like we're testifying that. Some people make sure to say it with at least one other person if they miss the minyan, because they want to be one of two witnesses and not doing it on their own.
I think, Rabbi, Behar means at the mountain.
Yes. Exactly. So that seems to be something indicating strength and power. Anybody else? No, I guess everybody is understanding. Okay. So here's the idea. It's actually interesting, before we get to the answer, this is a question that the Rebbe asks about many of the joined parshias. Many of the joined parshias seem to have names that are actual opposite ideas. And very often the Rebbe explains that even though they appear to be opposite, really they are one and the same idea expressed in opposite ways. If you take, for example, Vayakhel and Pikude. Vayakhel means to gather, Pikude means to count. So when you're gathering all together, it's focusing on the group. Pikude is when you're counting, you're focusing on the individual. Seems opposite. So the Rebbe explains that. When we talk about Tazriya and Metzora, Tazriya means to give seed, to conceive, which is the idea of new life. And Metzora is a person with leprosy. That's like death. In those days, you were a social outcast if you had that disease. So that's like the opposite of a new life. And once again, the Rebbe explains that there. Matos Mase as well. A mata is a staff, which is something very strong and firm, unbending and unwavering. And Mase means travels, which is something that indicates change and movement, the opposite of mata, which is right, staying in one place. Nitzavim vayelech is the last of the ones that are joined, possibly. Nitzavim means to stand, vayelech means to go. So it's interesting how almost all of these parshias seem to have names that are exactly the opposite of each other. But when you look deep into it, you see that they're two sides of the same coin and they're not conflicting at all, as we will see in today's class. Okay, so here's the concept. In general, we have to understand, why do we call the first parsha Behar, on the mountain, instead of Sinai, or at least Behar Sinai, on Mount Sinai? Welcome, Susan. So the idea is, before we get to the answer, let's just understand the question a little bit. The Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Of all the mountains, Hashem chose Sinai. According to the Medrash, there were other mountains that offered their services for the Torah to be given on them. Does anybody know the names of those mountains?
No.
So one of them was Hermon. That's in the Golan.
It's not in the desert.
No, it offered to jump over to the desert. It was going to do a little bit of skipping and hopping.
I thought it was a special place, the desert.
The desert was definitely a special place, and it had to be in the desert. The Torah had to be in the desert because the Torah belongs to everybody, just like the desert is nobody's property.
Right.
Torah
It's
does
not
belong to
settled.
one specific family, exactly. So there's no question it had to be in the desert. But the other mountains were willing to hop over to the desert, to be transplanted
Oh,
to the desert. But Hashem said no. I don't want any other mountain besides Mount Sinai, because Mount Sinai was a low mountain, is a low mountain. And Hashem wanted the Torah to be given on a low mountain, which represents humility, as opposed to the other mountains that offered their services. They were very tall, they were very wide, they were very mighty. Mount Sinai was a mountain, but it was still a low mountain, and that's why it was chosen. The word Sinai, what does the word Sinai mean? You're allowed to guess. Guesses are welcome. What does the word Sinai mean?
I never thought of it.
Is it a Hebrew word that you're looking for, or an English word?
Hebrew. Sinai is a translation of Sinai. So it originates as a Hebrew
So
word.
Sheena, is it the Sheena? The holy place where God rests?
No. I mean, there is a certain similarity in the word because it has a nun in it and a hey, but that's not, I don't believe that's one of the explanations. There's actually different opinions in the Gemara about it. Some say it comes from the word sin'ah, which means hatred. Because when the Jewish people stood at Sinai and they got the Torah, at that time, the nations of the world started to hate the Jewish people. And we're still experiencing that today, which is what we call anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism began when we became the chosen people. And all the other nations resented that fact that we were chosen. Although, according to the Medrash, they also had the opportunity to be chosen if they had accepted the Torah. But the fact is that the Jewish people were chosen and they were not. And this is something that upset them. So that's when they started to hate us. So according to that opinion, the word Sinai comes to the word sin'ah, which means hatred.
I think Sinai is spelled with a sin, not with a samach.
That's correct. Absolutely it is. But sometimes when it comes to drush means the non-literal interpretation of the Torah. We can borrow words or letters that sound
alike.
Exactly, and we can give a drasha. A drasha is a non-literal interpretation to
Rabbi,
understand what it might symbolize. Yes.
Is Aramaic language involved in the word Sinai?
Aramaic.
The Aramaic language in general, is a relative of ancient Hebrew. There are three ancient languages that are considered to be related, and they are Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. And there are some shared words between them. And we do at times say that a word in the Torah might be understood based on the Aramaic. I'm not familiar though with this, with Sinai having an Aramaic connotation, not that I know of. One of the interpretations about Sinai is that it comes from the word sneh. If you'll remember, Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Hashem for the first time at a burning bush.
Yeah.
And the bush is called a sneh. That conversation took place at Sinai. And the Ramban says, the Ramban is Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, not to be mistaken for the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, who lived 100 years earlier. So the Ramban Nachmanides says that the name Sinai comes from the word sneh, because it's the mountain of the bush, of the thorn bush, where Hashem first spoke to Moshe. So according to that opinion, the very name Sinai indicates something lowly and something humble. And of course, it was a mountain, which is called, why it's called Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. And one can ask, why was the Torah given on a mountain at all? If humility is so important, why was the Torah given on a mountain? Why was it not given in a valley or maybe just on a flat plain? Yes?
It had to be, first of all, it had to be obscured from the other people. Only Moses was the one that was supposed to get the information. He was the only one that was high enough in humility and the way he was with the people. He was the only one. He was the one. And for him to get to a very high mountain, I don't think it was possible. You know, he had issues, physical issues. And certainly after he had his first experience with Hashem, it was a shock to his body. And I think Hashem knew that it was going to be debilitating to Moses, but he was the only one he was the chosen. He was the one that could relate to all the people, to all the Jews.
So
I think it's
Yes.
because on the mountain you look up to the Torah. In a valley you would be looking down at the Torah.
I hear
Rabbi?
you. I hear you. That's a good shot. I
Rabbi.
like it. Good interpretation. Yes, go ahead, please.
I heard that the saying, they didn't want, the mountain was not to be too high for reasons that we should be humble, but it shouldn't be too low because we don't want to be considered too low, you know. So it was in between the mountain. It wasn't too low and it wasn't too high. It was meant to be in between so that we're not considered too humble and we're not considered too arrogant, you know, if the mountain is too big, you know. In other words, it's supposed to be in between, you know. That's why the mountains.
Very good. That's actually the answer that the Rebbe gives. Very good. That is that the Gemara says that a Torah scholar
You know,
have. Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just writing
The
something.
Gemara says that a Torah scholar has to have 1/8 of arrogance. What that means is it's an expression. 1/8 of an eighth is an expression for a small amount. Meaning to say that he has to have some firmness to his character, some strength of character,
Chutzpah.
a little bit of chutzpah.
No, it's 1/64. It's a very small thing.
1/64, exactly. A person should not be a complete pushover, should not be a complete doorstep, because then he will never be able to accomplish anything. Everybody will always run over him, and he won't be able to accomplish anything at all in his life. So a person has to be humble, but at the same time, a person has to know what they want. A person has to be strong in their beliefs and in their attitudes, and that's the symbol of the mountain that was low. It was a mountain, but it was still low. Very good. This is good. So the point is that the Rebbe asks, based on that, one still has to ask, the main emphasis should be on the humility, not on the strength of character. The main emphasis should be on the humility, because most people have no problem with being strong and being firm. It's the humility where most people have trouble with. Some people, yes, some people by nature are very, very easygoing, and they don't stand up for themselves, and they have to be prodded and instructed to stand up for themselves and not to allow themselves to be pushed around and so on. That's true. But usually what we have greater difficulty with is humbling ourselves. So therefore, if we want to name a parsha based on Mount Sinai, it would seem that the more appropriate name would be Sinai, which indicates you. Sorry,
You lost your voice.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on my phone because my computer's camera is not working, and when somebody calls me, it decides to supersede the Zoom meetings. Tell it to be quiet. Okay, so the point is that if we're naming a parsha after Mount Sinai, it would seem that we should choose the name Sinai rather than mountain, or at least Bhar Sinai, Mount Sinai, rather than just Bhar, which is just mountain. We have other parshias, by the way, that have two names, two words in its name. For example, Acharemos, right? That's two words. So there is such a thing as having a two-word name of a parsha. So why not just call the parsha Bhar Sinai instead of just Bhar? Or better yet, Sinai. That is the question. Answers are welcome, or ideas or comments.
Anna, you have your hand up? We can't hear you. Anna, we can't hear you.
You have to unmute, Anna.
Because I think it's more important, the symbolics than geographical location. That it has to be a mountain, and it really would not matter as much if it is Sinai or something else.
Okay. Physically, you would be correct, because the logistics of giving a Torah from a valley would be difficult. As Susan mentioned before, Moshe had to go up, be concealed, and there's symbolism in going up to receive the Torah, right, as was mentioned earlier as well. So definitely that seems to be the practical place for the Torah to be given, in a mountain, no question about it.
Rabbi, why don't we know where Mount Sinai is? Why has it been concealed to us? Why we don't know exactly where it is? Why?
We do not know where it is. Some say that they know. The Christians claim that they know, and they made a monastery on that mountain. But it's not exactly clear. There's no Jewish tradition about it per se. And that's because that mountain was not sanctified. The Jewish people were not allowed to go up on the mountain as long as the Shekhinah rested. If a person went up, he could be killed for desecrating the holiness of the mountain. The animals could not go up on the mountain. But once the shofar blast sounded, which symbolized that the Shekhinah was departing, it became a mountain like any other mountain, and anybody could go up there, any animal could go up there. There was no limitation whatsoever, because that mountain did not become sanctified. It was a temporary revelation, and it was not permanent. And that's why we never had it was never considered important to know exactly where it was, because it has only historic significance. It has no religious significance. The Torah, even though it was given in one spot, is relevant equally everywhere in the whole world. And perhaps if we might associate it with one spot only, we might think, yeah, this is where the Torah is. And, in other places, it's not so relevant. The fact is the Torah is relevant in the desert and in Israel and in the diaspora and in the dry land and in the sea. And even if you're an astronaut in space, you still have to keep the Torah. Like Ilan Ramon of blessed memory, before he went up on the Enterprise, he asked the rabbi in Orlando, the Chabad rabbi, when he should light the Shabbos candles, because it's Shabbos at different points in the world at different times, and the answer was given based on where he took off from. But the point is that the Torah applies everywhere. Perhaps that's why there was never a focus on identifying the mountain exactly.
I wanted to say that since we were personally not there, we are accepting the Torah wherever we are. So
Yeah.
Mount Sinai loses the value after the giving of the Torah was done.
To symbolize that you have Mount Sinai in you,
Right.
not in a specific place.
It's your own acceptance.
Very good. I hear it. Very good.
Rabbi,
Yes.
there are people who say that they believe that the actual location is in the Arabian Peninsula because archaeologists have found chariots with wheels and so on at the bottom of the waterway that exists between the Sinai Desert and the Arabian Peninsula. And there are people in Saudi Arabia who believe that the Mount Sinai actually that they found it because there's a cleft in a rock on this particular mountain, which is near 12 springs, and they've named it 12 springs to the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm just saying, this is what some people conjecture, and it's partly based on the archaeological discovery of the chariots that have been found in this water in between, which is posited to possibly be the chariots of the Egyptians.
So, yeah, I did read about that. There was one chariot wheel that was found along a land bridge that goes from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. And the land bridge crosses the Arabian Peninsula, meaning to say it's covered by water, but it's much higher than the rest of the seabed. And yeah, I did read that theory. It's an interesting theory. It makes for an interesting read. And, the people who believe that can make a nice tourist attraction on that mountain. They can sell some, Mount Sinai souvenirs and whatever. And I cannot disprove them. But nevertheless, the Jewish tradition that we have is that Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Desert. So even though we don't have a tradition about which mountain it is exactly, we do have a tradition that the Sinai Desert is the location of Mount Sinai.
Sinai Desert was named after the mountain.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm not going to sign on to the Saudi Arabian theory so quickly. But again, it's not explicit in the Torah as to where it is. It's just more of a tradition that we have as to the general location.
Thank you.
Rabbi, you said before that we weren't there. We weren't actually there, but there is the concept that actually we were all there.
Yes, indeed.
Not physically.
All the souls were there. Because we're all part of those souls that were there alive at that time. We're all branches of those souls. That's correct. And even converts who did not physically descend from those souls, they were there also. Spiritually speaking, yes.
My rabbi in yeshiva, he said, I said, were we all there? He said, yes, I saw you there.
Very cute.
I don't know if he was being cute or he was being actual.
Don't know either.
You would have seen him too.
Yeah, but his memory is better than mine. That's why he's the Rosh.
Very good. So here's the explanation that the Rebbe gives to understand why the first parsha is called Behar as opposed to Sinai or Behar Sinai. And then we're going to circle back to how the two names, excuse me, Bhar and Bchukosie, become one and united into one parsha. So here's the idea. When a person is humble because he has to be told to be humble, then he's not really humble. If you have to be told to be humble, that means that you really want to feel good about yourself. You really want to feel special and treasured and better than, and so on. And we have to tell you, no, be humble, recognize that all your accomplishments are with Hashem's help. It's not you on your own, something bigger than you, and so on. So if we would call the Parsha Sinai, emphasizing humility, that represents that we are talking about a person who has to be told to be humble, which means that he's not really humble. If you have to focus on your humility, then you're not really humble. The highest level of humility is when you are not thinking about yourself at all. You don't even have to think about being humble because you're not focused on yourself. You're You hear me?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Sorry, lost you all for a minute there. I got a phone call, which I have to ignore again. Not sure how to make my phone ignore phone calls. But anyway, the point is, I have to mute everybody. Unmute yourself as needed. The point is that the higher level of humility is when you don't have to be told to be humble. You're humble because you're actually not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about what I can do for Hashem, what I can do for other people. And in that context, sometimes you might have to stand firm, but not because you are feeling strong about yourself and you are feeling so special and better than everybody else. No, you're standing firm because you know that you are trying to accomplish something for a greater power. You're trying to accomplish something for Hashem's sake. for the sake of bringing godliness to the world. And in that context, you sometimes have to be firm, and you don't back down, and you really stand your ground. Take, for example, somebody like the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. We're approaching the month of Sivan, and on the 15th day of Sivan, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was imprisoned in communist Russia for his quote-unquote counter-revolutionary activities. And that meant when he was trying to organize the Jewish religion against the wishes of the communist state that wanted to ban that religion. And the Rebbe, even though he was a tzaddik, and a tzaddik is supposed to be humble, the Rebbe was very strong in his attitude against the communists. And he wrote a memoir about his conversations and his interactions with them. And he really never backed down. He was very firm in not giving in to what they wanted him to do and to say. And he really gave them a strong attitude. And he was, on the one hand, he was putting himself at risk, but in the end, they were forced to let him go, not just from jail, but from Russia. And then, of course, he escaped World War II as well, and he came to America and reestablished Chabad here and so on. So his strength of character came from his conviction that he was doing Hashem's will. That's what gave him strength. So the higher level humility is to be able to be a mountain and at the same time be humble. That's a sign of true humility, that you don't have to act in a way of meekness. You can act in a way of strength and still be humble, because it's not about you. It's about something greater than yourself. Susan, what you were going to ask something. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the trait of humility is something, it's learned, but yet it also is something that some people don't have. They don't have the capacity, and they don't understand what humility is, and you can't teach them. There are some people that are like that, and it's extremely frustrating because the world thinks you're very weak, and you can be a doormat, and yet that's not the case at all. But it's a trait I think you're born with it, to be very honest. I really feel strongly about that. You hear what I said? I feel strongly about that. I'm making double entendre. Yeah, yes. I feel it's an intimate feeling, and I don't think there's, like I said, I believe some people are born with it and some people can't learn it, but some people excel at having humility.
Well, there are certainly people who are born with better character traits than others. But one of the basic tenets of Judaism is that we believe that a person does have the power to change their character. So even a person who is not innately humble does have the power to overcome their arrogance. Sometimes it's harder than others. And some people just have, a greater sense of entitlement and arrogance than others. And it is a greater effort for them. But nevertheless, we believe it is possible. There is a Gemara that illustrates this idea, that a person can have strength of character and firmness of conviction, but not because of their own feelings, but rather because of a higher power. The Gemara says, if you see a Torah scholar getting angry, you should know it's the Torah that is angry within him. The word in the Gemara is not actual angry, it's boiling. If you see a Torah scholar boiling, which is an expression for anger, like seething, you should know that it's the Torah that is seething within him. Meaning to say, why is he getting angry? Not because it's a personal thing. We're talking about like a tzaddik right? A holy person. This, excuse me. A lot of noise is going on in my house. So the point is, the Gemara says that the Torah is seething within him, meaning to say, why is he getting angry? Not about a personal issue, but because he feels that the Torah's honor is affronted. So his anger is an expression of his desire to rectify the situation. And therefore, it's not a sign of personal anger and personal arrogance. On the contrary, he's fighting Hashem's battle, so to speak. So this is going to tie back in to Bhar Bchukosie. We started off by asking how do we unite two parshias which seem to have opposite themes, at least in their names. Bhar, which is a mountain, and Bhar Bchukosie, which is doing a mitzvah even though we don't understand it, which is a sign of humility. So in order to understand this, so first of all, we've already learned that Bhar is not arrogance at all. Bhar is true humility, where the person is so humble that he can really do what Hashem wants him to do with firmness and conviction and not lose that humility because they're doing it for Hashem's sake, not for their own sake. This is what people call, by the way, being in the zone. Being in the zone is an expression for doing something in a way that you're completely consumed by it to the extent that you're not thinking about yourself at all. And that's, by the way, something that brings people, according to a radio show that I heard. There's a radio show on Sundays that I often listen to because I have to pick up my kids from school at that time. And it's from 12 to 1 on Sundays from NPR. It's called Hidden Brain. Very interesting show. I think I may have mentioned it here in the past. And in one of those shows, they were talking about happiness and what helps a person get happy. And they were saying that when a person focuses on being happy, they're usually not happy. Because when you're focusing on being happy, you're thinking about yourself. And that doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness people achieve when they're not thinking about themselves, when they're thinking about something greater than themselves, which in that radio show, they called it being in the zone. When you're doing something for the betterment of mankind, for the betterment of your fellow, for the betterment of Hashem, something beyond yourself. When you're not thinking about yourself, that's when you get the greatest satisfaction. And this is the idea of Bhar. When you're accomplishing something like a mountain, but at the same time, you're not doing it for yourself, so you're not thinking about yourself, that is the greatest sign of humility. And that ties into Bhar Bchukosie. Because Bhar Bchukosie, it means mitzvahs that we don't understand, but it also means something engraved. The word Hakika in Hebrew means something engraved. So for example, when you write a letter on a paper, or a word on a paper, that letter or that word is not really completely one with the paper. You could scratch it off. You could erase it. But when it comes to engraved letters, like we have in the luchos, in the tablets of the law, where the 10 Commandments were engraved, they became part and parcel of the stone, inseparable from the stone. So the word Bhar Bchukosie means, it does mean mitzvahs that we don't understand, but it also means engraved. And it's talking about a person who serves Hashem in a way that his service to Hashem is completely engraved within him. It's something he does because that's who he is. It's not something he has to be told to do. It's something he naturally does. And that's why his not understanding of the mitzvahs in no way diminishes his devotion to the mitzvah. Because it's not about his understanding. I should understand what I'm accomplishing. I should feel good about what I'm accomplishing. It's about doing the will of Hashem. So understanding and not understanding is the same to him. That's why the word for mitzvahs that we don't understand is the same word as for engraved. Because when your relationship with Hashem is one that is engraved, when it becomes inseparable, it becomes part of who you are, then understanding or not is the same for you. It's all about serving Hashem, serving your master who's greater. And this ties back to Bhar and Bchukosie being the same idea. Bhar is a person who is focusing on Hashem, and as a result of that, he can have firmness and strength of character and humility at the same time, because it's not his own firmness and his own strength of character, it's for the sake of the greater power. And that's why it's one and the same as Bchukosie, which is a person who is completely unified with Hashem, where his relationship with Hashem, it has become so close that he's like an engraved part of Hashem, becomes part of who he is, and therefore it's very similar idea to Bhar, where you're doing and accomplishing, but not for your own sake, but for the sake of the divine. All right, that's my drasha. It's not my drasha. That's their Lubavitcher Rebbe's drasha.
Take them.
It's your take on the Rebbe's drasha.
You can give us, thank you.
Can I ask?
One second. I want to ask David if he can give us a summary of this talk, a 1-minute summary. I'm going to turn the tables on you.
A person has to be humble, but if the reason for your humility is for Hashem, then it's a true humility. And the message of the fact that it's a mountain and not just a plain or a valley is that a person has to have a certain amount of Jewish pride. But it's not pride in yourself. It's pride in the fact that you're doing what Hashem wants you to do.
Shkoyach, I couldn't have said it better. Well done.
Good guess.
Yeshar Koach.
Very good. Who was going to ask something? Susan, you were going to ask something?
Yes, I was going to ask if the Rebbe ever alluded to some of the information he was trying to give to us was not coming from him, but was coming from Hashem, directly from Hashem. Did he ever allude to that? Did he ever say, it's not me, it's from Hashem, it's from God?
The Rebbe was very not presumptuous. He barely ever spoke about himself. So it's obvious that what he was teaching was the Torah, which is Hashem's word, but I don't think he ever said it in those words, which could be sounding presumptuous, like he's a prophet almost. But yeah.
I didn't mean that at all. Not that he was a prophet. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that he was getting information from Hashem directly and just relating it to, in other words, the idea, some of the unusual ideas that he had. In a way, it wasn't really him. It was really from God. I mean, I've been watching these videos of him ever since I started the classes, and something different about that man.
Definitely, he was a very righteous man. He didn't speak much about himself, so I don't think he ever mentioned it. But definitely, he was plugged into a higher power. I'm sure he got insight.
You say he was plugged in?
Yeah, there's no question. He got
Okay.
insight from above. But I will spoke about that before. Okay, I wish you all a good Shabbos. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. Be strong and strong and strong.
Rabbi,
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Rabbi, can I say something in question, in answer to Dory's question, Susan's question?
Yes.
There's a story that I heard about, I guess it was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was the one that was the Rebbe during the time of the Titanic. And there was a chassid, and his son wanted to come to America from Europe, from Russia. And he asked the Rebbe that the Rebbe, he should have the Rebbe's blessing, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe's blessing. He has all these opportunities for his for life and for livelihood, and all these wonderful opportunities are awaiting him in America. And he wants to come. He wants to come to the United States, and he asked for the Rebbe's blessing. And the Rebbe and the father was asking on behalf of the son. And the Rebbe's answer was, not he should not come at this time in this manner. And the son asked a second time. He sent his father back and asked a second time, and I think even a third time. And finally the son said, listen, I'm going to come. I don't need some rabbis, okay, and I'm going to come. And he ended up coming, and he came on the Titanic, and he died on the Titanic. So the father, who was a chassid of the Rebbe, came and said to the Rebbe, why didn't you tell me that it was going to be the Titanic and he shouldn't come? And that would have stopped him. I would have stopped him, and he would have stopped himself. So the Rebbe answered, excuse me, the Rebbe answered, I'm able to say what I was told to say. In other words, that Hashem told me what he told me, and I was able to tell over based on what Hashem told me to say. And more than that, I was not able to say because Hashem didn't give me what to say.
I hear you. I hear you. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I
Thank
heard
you
that.
so much,
I
David.
never heard
Thank
that it was the Titanic.
Shabbat shalom לכולם.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe, everybody.